Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. We are talking more about ear stretching today. Most specifically, I want to talk about preventing thin spots when you're stretching your ears. Once again, I feel like I have to be running out of stretching topics to talk about soon, but every single time I do another stretching video, y'all have amazing comments, amazing questions. You keep sending me amazing questions through Instagram, so we're just going to keep covering it. Now, when it comes to stretching, thin spots are something that I know a lot of folks are really concerned about, and with good reason. If you end up getting a thin spot on your ear, it can limit how large you can stretch. It can be a weak point and an area where your ear could be more prone to tearing or even splitting in a worst case scenario, and it can also limit your ability to wear heavier styles like weights and hangers and even very heavy plugs or like large flare and large front plugs. So, we really want to try to avoid thin spots however possible and just try and make sure that we have nice, healthy, thick lobes that do all the things we want it to do. Now, when it comes to preventing thin spots, there's actually a lot we can do. And the first and the biggest and the answer nobody likes is starting with really good, really well-placed piercings. And this doesn't always mean stretching the first lobe piercings that you've had since you were a little kid. If your first piercings are too low or too close to your head or just in a bad placement in general, you could be setting yourself up to encounter thin spots when you're stretching. I see this the most frequently when your initial lobe piercings are too close to the side of your head or too close to the bottom of your ear. And as you stretch larger and larger, there's just not a lot of tissue in these areas and you end up with these thin spots. If that's the case, you may need to consider getting your lobes re-pierced before stretching or doing something like a large gauge initial lobe piercing to kind of correct the placement on your lobe and jumpstart the stretching process. But this very much depends on your ears and the placement of your piercings. And if you're not sure if your piercings are well placed for stretching, please take the time to get a second opinion from a piercer before you just start stretching. Because once you start stretching a little bit and you get far enough along, depending on the anatomy of your ear, it could be game over and you could be stuck with that piercing as the one that you can stretch, and you could be stuck with thin spots that might not allow you to get to your goal size or might not allow you to wear the jewelry that you want. So step one, we've got to start from good piercings. Step two to preventing thinning is stretching safely. Again, an answer that I know people don't like to hear, but it's the truth. When you rush stretching, when you skip sizes, when you use things like tapers, and when you use things like ear weights for stretching, you create the potential for a lot of thin spots. Now, let's break that down. When we go too fast and we skip sizes, these are some of the big ways that we create thin spots. And this happens a few different ways. Arguably the biggest is when we tear our lobes. If you tear your ear while you're stretching, usually from going too fast or skipping sizes, that tear then heals and becomes a weaker spot in your lobe than the rest of your healthy lobe tissue. And people usually have like one spot that always tears every time they stretch too fast or skip sizes. And a lot of times it's somewhere along the lower portion of the ear or somewhere close to the face. And once you have one tear there, the next time you go to skip sizes, the next time you go to stretch too fast, that spot with the tear that is now healed, that's the weakest link now on your earlobe. And that's the part, if you're skipping sizes and stretching too quickly, that's gonna wanna just tear again, because it's already weaker than the healthy tissue surrounding it, because it's already torn and healed once. It's scar tissue. And it'll tear again and tear again and tear again. And what'll happen is all of these repeated tears over time are going to produce a thin spot in that area. And if you end up getting even just a single tear and it's like right at the apex at the low point of your lobe, even if that's the only tear you ever get and you like change course and start stretching safely after that, if that tear is severe enough or if it doesn't heal well enough, that area might always get irritated, it might always have issues, and the scar tissue there might cause that spot to naturally thin as you stretch, especially if it's on the bottom of your lobe. So if you're rushing, if you're skipping sizes, you can tear your ear, and that can really easily cause you to end up with thin spots. And the same goes for using tapers to stretch, especially a lot of the tapers that are like commercially available on the market. I've talked about this before. I have a whole blog post about tapers, but a lot of the tapers that you find for like stretching kits and things like that are really poorly made tapers. They have these like super harsh gradations where they go from like the small tapered point to the wearable of the plug really quickly. And high quality tapers that are actually designed for piercers for assisting with stretches, they're long tapers with this like very gentle graduation between sizes. And when you have these cheaply made tapers with this like extreme grade between sizes, a lot of times those force the ear and create tears, and a lot of times because of the way these kits are made, they tend to focus those tears and all of that pressure on one point of the ear. Again, normally along the bottom of the ear or inside where the ear meets the face. And just like with tearing from stretching too quickly, the more of those tears you create, the more problems this causes. Now, the other issue with tapers is people will wear them as jewelry a lot of the time, or they'll put a taper in and they can't get a plug in, so they'll leave the taper in for a few hours or a few days. And the taper hanging down there out the back of the ear puts a lot of pressure on the bottom of the channel of your stretched piercing because gravity is just like pulling that taper down. And all of that weight and pressure on the bottom of the ear also can create thin spots. So when you stretch your ear with a taper, there is the risk of tearing and damaging your ear. And then on top of that, if you leave the taper in for a length of time, you are now putting a bunch of pressure on that tear and on the bottom of your ear, and this can further damage the ear. And this can cause blowouts, but it can also cause thin spots. And a lot of folks have this mentality of, oh, well, I didn't get a blowout, so my ears are fine. And the thing is, sometimes you do an unsafe stretch and you don't get a blowout. And you get just like a little micro tear. You don't even notice it. Your ear is just like a little crusty for a few days afterwards, and you chalk it up to the stretch and you write it off. But you're getting a thin spot. And that thin spot can grow and grow over time until it becomes something that really affects your stretching ability and really affects the jewelry you can wear. So just because you didn't get a blowout doesn't mean that that stretch didn't cause damage, and doesn't mean that that damage isn't going to catch back up to you. Blowouts are not the only thing that we're concerned about when we're stretching. Now, I mentioned briefly as well using weights for stretching, and honestly, I feel like that's its whole own category, step 3 of avoiding thin spots and tears. It's using ear weights and hangers appropriately. Ear weights and hangers are designed to be decorative styles, and while in years past people have used them to assist with stretching, the knowledge we have now, we understand that these things can create thin spots, especially along the bottom of the ear. You might be saying, well, Lynn, then how can you wear weights safely? And the thing is, you just don't wear them full time, and you wear them only when your ears are healthy enough to wear them, and you're careful about what weight you wear. So for example, if you're still stretching your ears and you're still going larger, you can still wear some weights and hangers. However, I wouldn't wear weights immediately after a fresh stretch. I would give your ears typically about a month to make sure they're fully recovered from stretching, and they feel good and they're healthy and they're stable at this size before trying to wear weights. You want to make sure you're wearing weights that are a safe and comfortable weight for your ear. If they're painful, if they're putting too much pressure on their ear, if the wearable of the weight is too thin for the amount of the weight, you may need to wear them for either a very short period of time or train your ear up to be able to handle that level of weight. Most folks don't just jump in and start wearing 80-gram ear weights off the bat. You start with like 10, 20, 30 gram weights, and you slowly train your ears up to be able to handle heavier and heavier weights. And the other thing comes with the sizing and the way you wear your weights. I have some weights that just as a design element have a very thick, wide wearable. That means that the weight of that ear weight is displaced over the entire wearable of that weight. Perfect. I can wear it just as it is. I have some weights and hangers that have a pretty thin wearable. All of the weight of that design is put on a very small portion at the bottom of my earlobe. That could risk me developing a thin spot from wearing it over time. So those weights are worn through saddles and spreaders, they're worn through silicone eyelets, they're worn through ear shields, they're worn in a stack with other weights that distribute the weight over more of my lobe. And just like actually lifting weights at the gym, where your ears are with weights is going to be different from other people's. So for example, I have extensively weight trained my ears. I love wearing ear weights. I make it a point to make sure I can continually wear ear weights. Even now when I'm not like working full time in a studio and going out all the time, sometimes I sit around my house with ear weights in to make sure I'm maintaining my weight training, to make sure my ears can safely wear these things. My best friend, for example, doesn't really weight train her ears, wears weights sometimes as like an aesthetic thing, but isn't really into the super heavy ear weights the way I am. So I can wear heavier stuff and on smaller wearables for longer, safer, just like the big muscly dude at the gym can lift the bigger weights because he's trained and practiced and gotten there. And my best friend can still wear decent weights, but not typically as heavy as mine and not typically for as long, and she needs to be a little bit more mindful of weight distribution, where some of her weights through silicone or through spreaders that I would wear just through my ears. There's nothing wrong with how either of us approach wearing weights. I just simply choose to spend my time doing more with more weights, and I really like them, and she's not a big fan of them. Sometimes the sensory feeling of really heavy weights on her ears all day is uncomfortable, and that's okay. Everyone's gonna wear weights in the way that works for them. But if you're just jumping into weights that are way too heavy, or you're not using other types of jewelry to displace that weight over your ears, like eyelets or saddles, you could be unintentionally creating thin spots. And especially if you're trying to use weights to like loosen up ears that are stubborn at the size that they're at, a lot of times people jump to using really heavy weights way too soon, or there's something else going on causing their ear to be stubborn and not want to stretch. Maybe they're wearing jewelry they're reacting to, maybe they have tears in their lobes or scar tissue that's sensitive, and just like throwing weights at that problem is not the fix. In fact, it's usually just asking to give yourself thin spots. If you are dealing with a stretch that's stubborn or you can't get something to go up, don't just try weights. Like, talk to a piercer, talk to someone knowledgeable about stretching, get an assessment done on your ears, see what might be the case, what might be going on. But wearing weights improperly or trying to use weights to stretch is a really big way that we create thin spots. And that really segues nicely into the next thing, which is just kind of hanging styles. It's always been pretty popular to just kind of hook your hanging earrings underneath your plugs, but I've seen like a resurgence of it in recent times. And if you can do this and your ear is fine with it and feels comfortable and you don't have any problems, awesome, cool, do it. But for a lot of people, putting thin hangers or rings or little earring hooks underneath their plugs and wearing their plugs all day, the pressure of the plug pushes that little ear hook or that little hanger into the bottom of your ear, and it creates a cheese wire effect, and you create a thin spot at the bottom of your ear from doing this. And I've had many clients over my time in the industry come to me with thin spots that they developed from doing exactly this. So if you're gonna do the cute little trick and put your danglies under your plugs, please be really careful. Check your ear like every hour or two, check that that tissue is still healthy. Don't do it all the time. Like, give your ears a few days break between doing this and just really monitor your ear closely. Understand that this could cause thin spots. If you don't want to deal with that, there's a ton of companies that make earring adapter plugs. America Organics does it, South Shore Adornments does it, and they're designed to work with all sorts of earrings. Anatometal and Industrial Strength make plugs with eyelets so that you can hook your stuff right through it. And also, Chaos Software. You can just poke an earring through a silicone plug and wear it, or if you have a silicone eyelet, you can just loop your earring over the bottom of it. There's lots of ways that you can do this without putting the ear hook or the hanger directly on the bottom of your lobe underneath your plug and potentially causing thin spots. So please be careful with what you're wearing. And lastly, really understanding your body is a big one when it comes to thin spots for certain people. And this can apply in a broad spectrum from anatomy to health to medical conditions. When it comes to things like anatomy, some people have naturally very small and attached earlobes or very, very thin earlobes. And folks with ears like that may be more prone to developing thin spots. So if you know you have an attached lobe, you have a very small lobe, there is not a lot of lobe tissue that you are working with to stretch, and you're someone who might be at risk for thin spots, you may find that your overall entire stretching process needs to go a little slower, that you need to take more time between sizes. You've got to really moisturize and massage your ears and keep them healthy. You may find that you just have to be a little bit more gentle with your ears. Same thing if you have really, really thin earlobes and thin spots become a concern. You may need to take stretching slower. You may want to utilize half sizes. If your anatomy is potentially going to impact stretching and potentially leave you more likely to deal with thin spots, you just might have to have a more cautious approach to stretching your ears. The same thing goes for medical conditions. I've talked a ton on my YouTube about different forms of skin condition and different conditions that affect like the collagen and connective tissue in our body and how that affects stuff. For my clients out there with EDS, yes, you have naturally hypermobile, stretchy skin, but a lot of you sometimes struggle with collagen regeneration and getting thicker and healthier lobes. It is not uncommon for a lot of folks to EDS who may just be able to like stretch and stretch and stretch their ears to deal with thin spots sometimes if they're not careful with the stretching process. You may need to be a little more cautious and a little more aware of that. Folks like me with psoriasis or other skin conditions like eczema or rosacea, if you end up getting a psoriasis or an eczema outbreak on your lobe, that could cause a thin spot to form and develop. You might need to be extra careful with your lobes, moisturize them more than the average person, and really just kind of monitor them to make sure that they stay healthy. Someone who goes tanning all the time and is always out in the sun. Sun damage and sunburn can really damage your ears and cause issues. I am someone who loves sunscreen in general. I preach about sunscreen. Everyone should sunscreen every day, but especially our lobes, because our ears can be a lot more sensitive and it's an often forgotten part of our body. So tanning beds a lot, or even if you're just outside all the time, you work outside, you're doing construction, you're doing other stuff. Constantly being out in the sun, the damage that UV rays can cause to your skin, that can cause your ears to get irritated and even develop thin spots. So you want to make sure you're putting sunscreen on your ears and you're keeping your ears protected. Sunburn on a stretched lobe, it's a real bad time. It's a real bad time. Nobody wants that. Thin spots can be a real concern when you're stretching your ear, and they can definitely majorly impact your stretching goals and your jewelry goals in the future. The good news is there's so much that we can do to prevent our ears from thinning as we stretch. By starting off with a good piercing to stretch, by using safe stretching practices and being mindful of our ears, taking our time to stretch, and wearing our jewelry appropriately and just listening to our body and checking in with our body to make sure that what we're doing is safe for our body, and just basically being really respectful and really in tune with our bodies, we can totally avoid dealing with thin spots during the stretching process and end up with really nice, thick, healthy lobes at our goal size that can do all the things we want to do with them. So please, regardless of if you're just starting out on your stretching journey or you've been stretching for a while, be patient with stretching, give your ears time, respect your ears, respect your body, and be gentle with them, and I promise you, you will have a successful, safe, wonderful stretching process. As per usual, if you like the videos that I put out, please hit like, please subscribe. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to sit down and chat with y'all again soon. Bye!